Good day, everyone. I'm Tamron Hall. The News Nation is following breaking news as both campaigns trailblaze across the country 3 days before Election Day. In fact, we've got some live pictures. Take a look out of Wisconsin, where President Obama is preparing to speak before a ton of supporters gathered there in Milwaukee. The president won Wisconsin back in 2008 with 56% of the vote in that state. This time around, the campaign, though, admits the state could be in play with Congressman Paul Ryan on the GOP ticket. We'll bring you the president's remarks live from Milwaukee as soon as they get things started there. And after weeks of polls that put the race up in the air, there are signs the president is solidifying a top position in the race. Take a look at this. Two new NBC News Wall Street Journal polls, Marist polls, show the president holding on to a 6-point lead in Ohio. You know the importance of that state by now, and 2 points ahead of Governor Romney in Florida, but within the margin of error. Also, early voting in Florida ends today after the number of early voting days in that state was cut by half this year. 25 million people have already voted early in 34 states and Washington, D.C. And back to the frenetic pace on the campaign trail, both candidates have already held rallies in New Hampshire, Iowa, and Wisconsin.
You do want to be able to trust your president. You want to know that your president means what he says and says what he means. After 4 years as president, you know me. You may not agree with every decision I've made. You may at times have been frustrated by the pace of change, but you know what I believe. You know where I stand.
President
made a lot of promises, but those promises he couldn't keep. And the difference between us, he made promises he couldn't keep. I'm making promises I have kept, and I will keep them for the American people. I have a clear and unequivocal message, and that is America is about to come roaring back.
Joining me now, Washington Post columnist and MSNBC analyst Eugene Robinson, Mark Caputo, political writer for the Miami Herald, and NBC senior political editor Mark Murray. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. I got to bring Eugene in because he is right here, and I have the pleasure of sitting alongside. When we heard, or I heard, Governor Romney say, you know, we're coming roaring back, I instantly thought about the auto bailout. The auto industry. You know how many times we heard on the campaign trail from Obama and others saying GM is roaring back, and I thought, wow, it all goes back to Ohio and that auto bailout, which was unpopular at the time, and now here we are.
Right, and so one of the big questions is, will Mitt Romney kind of blur the lines on the auto bailout sufficiently to gain a little ground in Ohio? Because that is a huge issue in that state, and arguably we could be saying Wednesday that issue won the state for President Obama, and then it won re-election for President Obama.
Do you think we're talking too much about Ohio? I mean, listen, you've got the Romney campaign saying that they're looking at Pennsylvania, Minnesota, that they perhaps have some traction there. And we know that new numbers in Florida, and we'll talk with Mark about that, show at least a difference in polls from the NBC News Marist poll, and some of the local polls show that Romney's up more than we're indicating.
Well, first of all, I think both sides genuinely think they're going to win, or certainly think they have a great chance of winning. That said, Pennsylvania has always been fool's gold for Republicans. You know, it looks tempting at the end, and they might go for it.
Sounds good on paper, as we like to say.
But they don't get it.
Yeah.
Now, if the new NBC Marist poll is correct about Florida, Florida can decide it before we even, do the late night counting of the absentee ballots out of Cleveland. I mean, because Florida, if that goes for President Obama, that's pretty much the story, I think.
Mr. Caputo, let me bring you in on this. The Miami Herald poll shows that Romney's got 51%, Obama 45%. That's slightly different than what we're showing. 2 points ahead for Governor Romney in Florida, that within the margin of error. I have to say, we were also struck, my team and I, looking at the video of the lines of people early voting in that state today.
Well, those lines are really going to be the indication of how this campaign is going to go. We've had gangbusters early voting turnout in Florida, about 2 million people in a week. Because of early voting, Democrats have an edge in ballots cast of about 104,000 over Republicans. Republicans usually do well at mail and absentee ballots. Democrats dominated early voting, but guess what? The legislature, Governor Rick Scott, shortened the early voting days, and relative to the early voting hours we had in 2008 in South Florida, they essentially cut them by 22% or about 24 hours. So it's going to make a difference. What we're going to see on Election Day now is a lot of those folks who probably would have early voted, they're going to show up on Election Day and cast ballots. So the question is how many of these people are actually voting for Obama? How many are voting for Romney? Obviously, we don't know. Indications are, from our poll, is that Romney's winning the key demographic or the key swing voters of the key swing state, and that's the independent voters. He's marginally winning them. He's also doing well with North Florida Democrats, certain crossover Democrats, rural Democrats. He pulls about 16% of them in our poll, whereas Obama only pulls about 5% Republican support. So that crossover appeal, so to speak, of Romney's in Florida and the independent edge that he appears to have is making a difference. But good campaigns can change polls. They're not changed by polls. And the question is who turns out their voters and who does it best? We're going to find out today. Today's the last day early voting. Yeah. And then on Tuesday, obviously, that's when the ball game is.
Mark Murray, let me bring you in. Both men have these op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. We have the headlines from both. Real progress, but we're not done. That's from the president. And Governor Romney, a new direction for America. What are your thoughts on just the headlines alone, not even the content of the op-ed itself, but those two different headlines?
Well, right. They're actually two different realities. And actually, when you look in all the polls, it doesn't matter what it is. Democrats seem to be a whole lot more optimistic about the country's direction, or people who actually are planning to vote for President Obama are more optimistic. People who are more pessimistic, Republican voters, are the Republicans. And so you end up having this dichotomy where in some respects it actually almost has a 50-50 split, which is actually mirrored by a lot of the national polls that show this contest to be incredibly close. I would say, and when you actually add the economic data that we saw on Friday from the jobs report, Mitt Romney's task is a little bit harder because he's actually saying, look, this has been a rough last 4 years and it's time to actually, good days are ahead. But the argument, and when you actually look at all the statistics that are out there, things are moving in the right direction as far as things are much better than they were 4 years ago. And even if Mitt Romney ends up winning the presidency on Tuesday, he will end up inheriting a much better economy than President Obama did 4 years ago.
Well, that's interesting, Eugene. It was several months ago. There was an article that said insiders in the Obama team were just mortified at the thought that if Governor Romney wins the White House, that he would get credit for the recovery put in place by actions and decisions made by them.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what would happen. And there's nothing anybody could do about it. The sitting president is going to get credit for the good and the bad. And look, Governor Romney promises to add 12 million jobs in his first term. Most economists believe that given the direction of the recovery, if it picks up as expected, we're going to gain 12 million jobs anyhow in the next 4 years. Yeah. So most agree that the economy is going to get better, and whoever's president's going to get the credit.
Let me talk to you a little bit about, speaking of getting credit, the response to Sandy. Part of the president, and gentlemen, you can all take a look as well as folks at home. President Obama went to FEMA in Washington, D.C. this morning, and this is what he had to say regarding this response to Sandy. Let's play it.
Leaders of different political parties working together to fix what's broken. You know, it's a spirit that says no matter how bad a storm is, no matter how tough times are, we're all in this together. We rise or fall as one nation and as one people.
If we can pull up the Marist poll, the NBC Wall Street Journal, president response to Sandy, 73% approve in Ohio, 70% out of Florida. Mark Caputo, let me bring you in because 70% of the people in that home state of yours approve of his handling. Will that have an impact, perhaps not on those who are early voters, but on Tuesday, those who look back and may have heard comments from the Republican primary that were made by Governor Romney regarding FEMA? We know FEMA is still popular in that state for the obvious reasons.
Well, I think it would. You know, Florida's a big state. We're a TV state. Our electorate makes its decisions largely on what they see on television, not when they read the newspaper or on the internet. And the coverage for a while, before, during, and after Sandy, especially after Sandy, has been very favorable to President Obama. You would think that's going to help, and it's still going on. Having Chris Christie as a de facto unintentional surrogate doesn't seem to hurt Obama one bit. It probably seems to help him.
What's so interesting, you say Chris Christie, de facto endorser or whatever of Obama. You've got this new article, Eugene and Mark, this exclusive from Politico, saying that there were people on Governor Romney's team who believe that Chris Christie was the VP choice till the very end, and it was almost surprise. No, it's Paul Ryan. Right. Isn't that interesting timing that this story comes out about Chris Christie?
It's a little too interesting, actually. and in fact, look, there are two ways to react to this. Governor Christie says, I'm doing my job. The president's doing his job. We're working together, and I'm being honest. And you have to respect that. Look at two different examples. Haley Barbour, who went through Katrina in Mississippi, says that's absolutely what Governor Christie ought to say, that he's doing what he ought to do and get off his back. And then you have these sort of underground voices in the Romney campaign who are taking a very different tack and kind of sniping at Christie from odd angles, as in pique, basically, out of a fit of pique.
Well, I mean, you can't really blame him. This is game theory. You choose A, I choose B. If my guy looks like he's helping you, even if he's not truly helping you, but looks like he's helping you, and appearance has a tendency to be reality, I don't blame the Romney folks for being a little peaked or PO'd.
Well, you might not blame him, but you could probably blame him for showing it, if that is the case. And by that, I mean some of the conservatives who've backed Governor Romney showing that they were quite irritated with this and rather take the high road, knowing that all eyes are on this storm and the response. So, Mark, let me bring you in. Looking at these numbers, 73% of the folks in Ohio who already approve of the bailout now approve of the president's response to Sandy. What do we make of that when you couple it with the Chris Christie hug heard around the world, it seems, and we can't stop talking about it?
Tamron, I think you can actually say that the final full week of the campaign was a very good one for President Obama. It gave him a lot of momentum heading into the final stretch. Not only did he get that hug from Chris Christie, people end up seeing that approving his response to Hurricane Sandy. There were a slew of battleground state polls, including in Ohio, that showed Obama ahead. There did seem to be momentum that he had. And I think most importantly, and when you actually look back at Hurricane Sandy, and of course we don't know how election night's going to turn out, but it did freeze the Romney campaign in place. And there was a lot of talk of Mitt Romney for 2 or 3 weeks that he was the candidate who had the momentum. He was beginning to make his closing argument. And then Hurricane Sandy hit and it froze that. And then the campaign began just a couple of days later.
Which is interesting, Mark, because you often hear, and I want all of you to comment on this, where any sport they'd say you don't want to peak too soon. With this unknown variable of this storm allowing the president to peak at this time, you do wonder, without Sandy, where would this race be tonight?
You mean this is like one of those football games where the last team with the ball wins, essentially?
Well, they always give you the overtime stats. They say the person with, the first touch on the ball wins most of the time.
If you want to take that metaphor further, though, it's because people are looking for answers and they're looking for solutions and they want to believe in something. They want to believe in somebody. So it may be that the last candidate with the football wins.
Well, I do wonder in Florida, most polls agree that Romney is nominally up, and he's up almost in all of the surveys, or a majority of them, among independents. And again, that makes a huge difference. In the end, our state has a higher home foreclosure rate, a higher unemployment rate than the rest of the nation. Yeah, they see this stuff on television, but in the end, the race is going to come down to jobs, and a lot of folks are going to make a decision based on that. And the race comes down now to who turns out their base. And I would not underestimate the Romney campaign in Florida. They've got a very good team, and they're doing a good job. They're staying close to President Obama, who in 2008 just slaughtered the Republicans in early vote. It's not happening now, albeit President Obama's still up.
Mark Murray, Mark Caputo, Eugene Robinson, thank you so much. Great pleasure having all of you on. Thank you, guys.